everyone, my name is Vic and today I'm going to be going over all of the books that I read for the month of August. Now, I've kind of been in a reading slump recently. I genuinely just didn't want to read anything that I owned, and I have a ton of books that I need to get to, but just none of them were doing it for me. I just did not care until I got the book of the month picks for August. I don't know what it was, but this month the picks were just really good. I liked pretty much all of them. I was only able to get 5 of the books, but they were all they all sounded so interesting, and you'll see why. There's one especially that really just got my attention because it was super unusual. It definitely got me out of my reading slump, although not all of them were going to be faves. Most of them were really good, and out of the 6 books that I read for this month, 5 of them did come from book of the month. For the genres of books that I read for this month, I was a little bit all over the place. I have a memoir, a mystery novel, a thriller, some romance, some horror, a little bit of everything was there. I was genuinely just all over the place, but I'll just jump right into it. The first book was a book of the month pick, and it is Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. I hope I said her last name right. This book is in the magical realism genre, which, if you're not familiar, is when a book has the same reality as us, except they have a touch of a magic system within the reality. In this instance, the family themselves, they are from Santo Domingo and they have a magical bloodline, but the magic in the family is not allowed magic, if that makes sense. It's very subtle magic. For example, the abuela in this family, she's a seer, but she can only predict when someone is going to give birth and if they are going to give birth to a boy or a girl. And another example is one of the moms in here. Her name is Flora. She's also a seer, but she predicts death. She doesn't get control over when she gets them, so she might predict someone's death several weeks in advance, and other times she might only predict it 5 minutes in advance, so she doesn't have a lot of control over it. There's a lot of other really unique magical powers in this book. For example, one of the daughters has an alpha vagina, and this is in the words of the book, I am not making this up, and hers is essentially she can control every physical function of her vagina. So whatever that means to you, it goes into detail in this book, but yes, so they all have magical powers. They're just not loud ones. They're very subtle, sometimes useless powers, but they do have them, and they typically run through the women in the family. So in this book, we are following the family as Flor, who, as I said earlier, is able to predict death, decides that she wants to host a living wake for herself. Now, if you don't know, a living wake is essentially like hosting a funeral for yourself while you're still alive. You get to meet everyone that would normally come to a funeral. You get to hear them say any kind of appreciations and have all of the gathering and the togetherness aspect of a funeral without you already being dead. Now, since Flora is able to predict deaths, this pretty much freaks out the entire family. They're not sure if she's predicted her own death or if she's predicted the death of someone else in the family, and Flora isn't telling anyone about it. So we're kind of following the family as they're exploring their different dynamics as they're dealing with the possibility of Flora dying and planning for this wake. And this is multiple point of views. I think it's like 4 or 5 point of views, and we're flashing back between the past and the present, and it's a little bit all over the place in terms of story. It's kind of odd to explain. It's very slice of life. There's not this drastic thing that's happening. It's just all of them living their lives, going through their drama, reflecting on their past, on their traumas and how they've gotten to where they are, and then seeing that reflected in their reactions to the possibility of someone in their family dying soon. For me personally, this was a 2.5 stars, and I know that sounds bad, but it really isn't. For me, it is truly neutral. It is directly in the middle. It was neither good nor bad for me. It's really odd because when I was reading this book, it wasn't like I got the feeling that I wanted to stop. Like, I never wanted to DNF it, but at the end of it, it just didn't feel like anything had happened. There were several interesting moments throughout the story, but it didn't feel like the story itself was one large interesting story. So for me, it's kind of just average. It did have a lot of quotable moments, and it really explores different family dynamics, especially between mothers and daughters and sisters, and how our childhood and the environment that we grow in affects us. For me, it was okay. There was some interesting tidbits, but it really just didn't feel like anything happened. So a 2.5 star for me. Just wasn't my personal favorite. The next book I read, of course, is another book of the month pick, and it is The Many Lives of Mama Love by Lara Hardin. Now, this is an unexpected pick for me because this is a memoir, and at least for me personally, I tend to only read memoirs and biographies, autobiographies, if it's about someone that I know already, and I had no idea who this person was. But this piece of her life that she talks about, because it's not her full life, it's just this one section of her life, sounds so insanely interesting that I had to read it. Lara Hardin, her memoir essentially follows her as she is a suburban white mom in the PTA who has the dream life. She has the dream house, the dream husband, the dream child, even the dog. But underneath what seems like a perfect life, her and her husband both have a horrible addiction to heroin. And they're so addicted to it that they are spending all of their money, all of their finances on getting more heroin and leaving pretty much nothing for their daily necessities like food and supplies for themselves and their son. So to remedy not having any money to take care of their child, Lara does what seems logical at the time, and she starts stealing the credit cards from her neighbors and her fellow PTA moms to pay their bills. She does this in different ways. She steals the credit card applications from her neighbors' mailboxes. She goes around her son's school and she'll open car doors that are unlocked to dig through any purses she finds, take out cash, or take a credit card that she thinks won't be noticed, and then order things online or book a hotel, anything to get the bare necessities. And it seems like she's just getting by when her and her husband are both arrested on drug charges, and for Lara specifically on identity theft charges. Things happen quickly. She's taken in, her son is taken from her, she's in jail, and she has been labeled the neighbor from hell in multiple news articles. And it seems like her life has just completely fallen apart. This memoir pretty much follows Lara as she goes to jail and has to adjust to her new life in jail, the new hierarchy and the rules that come with being in jail, while also trying to get clean and get custody of her son back before she loses her parental rights. All the while, she's having to fight a system that's against her and fight the judgments that come along with being a felon even when you are rehabilitated and released on parole. She shows her healing journey and how she made it back from her lowest point into being a successful writer who has ghostwritten many books that I'm sure a lot of us have heard of. I had heard of one of the books she's written specifically, and how she got to where she is today. I really truly enjoyed this book. Not only was it a really hopeful story and very educational in terms of learning about the justice system and its flaws, but also because it read like a fiction book, like a movie. Like, it was super interesting, and there were the highs and the lows, and it was very steady and fast paced, and I never got bored. And so even though it's someone's actual life, it was so interesting to read about. She specifically highlights the struggles of drug addiction and how hard it is to come out of that addiction, even when you know that it's bad and it's hurting those around you. She also talks about the unfairness of the jailing system and how it's kind of this endless circle of the jail using inmates for free labor, but then when inmates leave, if they're rehabilitated, then the jail loses that free labor. They're not able to make money. So jails kind of have incentives to keep people getting reincarcerated, because it means that the cycle of free labor and profit for the people that own it continues. She also talks about the way all sentences are life sentences just because of how the system is built in the US and how difficult it is for inmates once they're released to start their lives up again. They have these unfair expectations and honestly impossible expectations for things that they have to do, especially if they have any form of drug charges. And if they have no support system, it really is impossible for them to meet all the requirements for them to stay out of jail again. But overall, this is just such a beautiful story, and typically I don't really rate memoirs, or if I do, I'll always give them 5 stars because it's someone's actual life, but this one truly is a 5-star rating. I loved this book. I think I read it all in one sitting. If not one sitting, then it was 2, like back to back. It was just such a good story. I'm always interested in life in jail and life in prison, and she goes over that pretty extensively of what it's like to readjust and kind of join the hierarchy and join this different environment with different expectations and rules. But overall, I adore this book, and even if you normally aren't a memoir person, I would definitely give this a try just because it was so interesting. It genuinely did read like a work of fiction, so highly recommended. All right, so this next book is one of the reasons that I bought all 5 books from Book of the Month for this month. It just sounded so interesting. Like, It sounded so unique and so interesting. It's a premise I've never heard of before, and it was one of those where I felt like I was either gonna really like it or it was just gonna be super weird. And so I just took the risk and got it anyway. And that book is Shark Heart, a love story by Emily Habeck. I apologize if I said your last name wrong, but this book is so good. It's so good, and I need you to hear me out, because when I explain what it's about, you're going to side-eye me. You're gonna think I'm weird, and just hold on. Just hold on for a second, okay? This book follows a newlywed couple, Louis and Ren, in that first year after their marriage, as they're in their little honeymoon phase and they're super happy. But Louis gets a devastating diagnosis. He is transforming into a great white shark. Hear me out. Hear me out. So, background that I think is helpful going into this book, because if you don't have this background, you're probably going to be weirded out by it. So in this reality, it's our world, but occasionally, it's kind of rare, there are these diseases that make people turn into animals. In this world, that's a normal thing. It's not odd necessarily for this to happen, although it is rare. So with that background, in this world, that is a disease that exists for people to turn into animals. And this book just follows the couple as they're navigating their grief and having to accept that what they thought was going to be forever, or at least a really long time, is going to come to an end a lot sooner than they expected. It is dual point of view, so we get the point of view of both Louis and his wife Ren. Louis having to deal with the fact that all of these dreams that he wanted to come true are just not going to be possible. He's a drama teacher and he always wanted to be an actor or to have his own play produced, but there's just not enough time. He has less than a year that's expected until he'll turn into the great white shark, and as he progresses, not only will his physical features change, but his mental state will also change. He'll start to forget people and forget things, become more aggressive, his diet will change, and eventually it'll get to the point where when he's fully changed or mostly changed, he will have to be released into the ocean to try to survive on his own. As for Ren, on her side, we see her losing the love of her life, and this is actually not the first time that she's had to experience this kind of loss before. Her mother went through a similar ordeal when she was a child, and so she's not only losing someone she loves, but she's also having to take on this exhausting role of being a caretaker and having to devote all of her time to taking care of her husband while she still has him, even as it's exhausting and sometimes dangerous for herself. And overall, we really just see them both having to accept their circumstances, accept this change that's coming, and learning to move on and not live life in fear. Honestly, this book was truly beautiful, and just the way that it explores grief and the exhaustion of caretakers and having to move on even when you don't want to, and continuing to make choices knowing that you might have to go through a repeat of trauma and a repeat of pain. It's such a good book, and I genuinely think it's one of those books that you're either going to love or you're going to hate, but the premise stuck out to me, and although it sounded a little goofy at first when I heard it, it is genuinely such a beautiful book, and I highly recommend it. For me, this was a 4-star book. Next up, we have Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. This one came highly recommended actually, but I struggled to get through the first 3 to 4 chapters of this book, mainly because I hated the voice of the main character. I hated her voice. She came off as very annoying and know-it-all, and the reasoning for some of the things that happened in the beginning were just annoying to me, and so I really struggled, but I kept pushing through because people said it was really good, and this author has written other books that are apparently also really good. I haven't read them, but apparently they're also good, and so I forced myself to push forward, because if it was truly a good book, then I knew I shouldn't just judge it by the first few chapters, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because this was such a good book. I know I've said that about a lot of the books that I've talked about in this video, but there's a lot of good books out there, okay? This book was a 5-star book for me, and I strongly recommend everyone read it. This is a thriller slash mystery book. It's weird because for me, I always feel like thrillers feel more like you're on the edge of your seat because like you're about to get murdered, but this one is more like just like a high stakes mystery, I guess. I'll also say I'm normally pretty good about figuring out the endings for mysteries and thrillers, but this one genuinely kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I wasn't sure what's going on. There was just so much that came together that I just I did not figure out the ending until I was already at the ending. This book follows a Korean American family. The mom is Korean, the dad is white. They have 3 kids. 2 are twins, Mia and John, Mia being our main character, and their youngest son, Eugene, who is autistic and who has Angelman's syndrome, which is essentially he has poor motor functioning skills and he can't speak. He also generally appears happy. He's always smiling even when he isn't actually happy because he can't control the motor functions of his face. This story starts out with Mia's dad and younger brother Eugene going to the park to hang out together, and after a few hours Eugene comes running back covered in dirt by himself, but their dad is nowhere to be found. They look around on their own for a few hours, but they realize that he is genuinely missing and Eugene is covered in dirt and blood, so whatever happened to their dad isn't good. But the only person that knows what happened is also the only person that can't say what happened. And it's just such a good story. There's family secrets and all of these things that are hidden that come to light, and it's also a really great representation for disability. The author has a note at the end of the book that talks more about the specific disability that's mentioned and why she put it in the book. It is such good representation. It is just such a good book. Honestly, it has multiple plot twists, but I would say the main plot twist is just heartbreaking, but also so unexpected at the same time. And like I said, one of my favorite parts about this book is that you get this ending. They deliver you this ending that has a pretty bow, and then as soon as you're like, oh, okay, that's the ending, all of a sudden they add this little, or is it? And you have to just come to terms and kind of make your own conclusions about what you think happened as the real ending. I genuinely enjoyed this book so much, and it was very unexpected, and the reasons that I liked it were unexpected, I will say, but I can't say them without spoiling the book, so I just recommend reading this for yourself because it is so good. This is my last book of the month book that I read, and it is the one that I was the most excited for, and I was not disappointed, and that is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This is a horror romance that's also historical, and it kind of is combining my 2 favorite things with the horror and romance aspect, so I was really excited. Also because vampires, I feel like I don't get a lot of good vampire books anymore, and usually when I think of vampires nowadays I still think of like Twilight or Vampire Diaries, so I was excited to get a more horror version, classic version of vampires. So this book does take place in the 1800s in Mexico during the Mexican-American War, which is essentially when the United States was invading Mexico trying to gain more territory. We follow our 2 main characters in a dual point of view, Nena and Nestor, and the book starts off with both of them being 13 years old, and they are both best friends, and although they don't quite know it yet, they both love each other and have little crushes on each other. Nena is the daughter of a wealthy landowner. He owns kind of like a large ranch, but it's almost like a village. They have a lot of workers that live on the land, and they're essentially the landowning family, the main family that controls everything, that sets the law for that specific land that everyone lives on. Nestor is the nephew of one of the workers on the land. Technically, I think they are cowboys that are working Nana's father's land. They work for Nana's father, and they're typically seen as lower class and lesser than Nana's family, at least by Nana's family. The kids have always been friends since Nestor showed up on the farm, but as they've gotten older, Nana's family has kind of wanted to discourage them from being around each other anymore. They don't see it as appropriate for Nana to be around a boy alone for long periods of time, and they also don't want to encourage their friendship because they know that Nana is not going to be allowed to be with him as they get older. She's going to have to be married off to someone else that is wealthy, and more than likely someone else that is a landowner. But despite Nana's family wanting to separate them, Nana and Nestor continue to meet at night to go on adventures together. Mainly they are exploring all of the tales and stories that Nestor's abuela has been telling them since they were kids. They've gone to prove, disprove all of these different monsters that they've heard about, like La Llorona, and this night specifically that the book starts off with, Nestor and Nana are looking for this lost treasure. For Nana, this is just another time for them to spend together and to go on an adventure and investigate a tale, but for Nestor, this is an opportunity for him to become wealthy, become a landowner, and possibly be allowed to be with Nana one day. But as they are out searching and they are looking for this treasure, they start to get a weird feeling. They feel like someone is watching them, and they notice that it's really quiet. All of the bugs and the birds and the normal noises you hear when you're outside at night have gone completely silent. But before they can even recognize that something might be wrong, this monster appears. This monster with fangs and slits for noses and no eyes appears and attacks Nana, biting her in the neck. Nestor is able to knock it down and kill it by hitting it in the neck with a shovel, but it's too late and Nana has already been attacked and is prone on the floor. She's not moving, she's pale, and it seems like she's not breathing. Nestor takes her to her family and begs them for help, but her mom screams out that Nana is dead. Nestor's unable to face what he's done. He feels guilty for being the reason that Nana was out that night and for being the reason that she's dead, and so he runs away and he never goes back. 9 years pass and they are both 22 years old. Yes, Nana actually did survive, but she has no memory of the attack and has no understanding of why Nestor left her. She feels that he abandoned her for no reason because she can't remember anything and her family won't talk about the incident. At this point in time, Nana's family is kind of in danger because of the Mexican-American War. The United States is invading further and further, and they are wanting to take the land that Nana's family lives on. At this same point, there seems to be this strange disease that's kind of taking over the people on the land. Nana knows that her family is planning on trading her hand in marriage in exchange for more men to fight in the war and to protect their land. But Nana wants to prove to her father that she's more useful at home than being married off. And in order to do so, she plans on traveling with the soldiers that are going to fight in the Mexican-American War and acting as a healer for them. Meanwhile, Nestor, who is also 22, has been off on his own for many years now, acting as a cowboy and kind of an independent worker who's not owned by anyone. He's developed a bit of a reputation as a hard worker and also as a ladies' man, but in reality he's really just been running from the ghosts of his past, mainly Nana, who he still thinks is dead. He never plans to return home due to his guilt, but he's requested to come back and fight in his uncle's place in the war, and so he has no choice but to go back to his home and fight. Of course, the two do meet again, and there is a lot of shock at their reunion, but also a lot of anger from Nana's side because in her point of view, Nestor just left her for no reason. But of course, Nestor is extremely shocked because he thinks that she's been dead for all of these years. They don't have a lot of time to digest their feelings or to even fight it out because danger is imminent. There is a war right at their front door and an even greater threat of monsters that are seen in the night that they might only be able to survive if they can stick together. I want you to just imagine this is friends to lovers to enemies to lovers. That is the exact sequence, and I absolutely love it. I loved the relationship in this book, especially Nestor. I adored him. It is dual point of view, so you're getting both sides of the relationship, and I just loved it. I absolutely loved this book. It was so good, so good. The romance is perfect and the horror aspects are not super overwhelming. It's more of a background that everything is set in, and I just love it. It was so good, and that forbidden lovers trope is there, and it's such a good book. I really loved it. For me, this was a 4.5 stars. It was just so good. I just wish it was a little bit longer because I feel like it wrapped up and everything happened so quickly. But I will say one of my favorite parts of this is the way that they handled the vampires in the story. It's something that I haven't really seen a book or even a movie do with monsters before, or maybe I just haven't seen it in a long time. I won't say anything because I don't want to spoil the book because it is kind of an important part of the book, but the way that they handle the monsters in this is just, it's so good. So good. I absolutely loved this book. Highly recommend it. Even if you're not super into horror, I think that you would still be able to enjoy this because it's more of the background of the story. Like, it's like a horror setting, but the story is more survival and romance. So even if you're not a super big fan of horror, I don't think this would scare anybody, honestly. It's more of just the setting. All right, and the last book that I read for the month of August is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. And if you notice, I took the wrap cover off of this book because I think that the hardcover is just so pretty. Like, it's so pretty. Honestly, this book has been on my radar for quite a while, but I guess I just hate myself because I haven't picked it up, and I've seen it multiple times. I honestly think it was an option on Book of the Month at one point, and I still didn't pick it, even though it's literally everything that I like. It's paranormal and it's mystery and it has these historical vibes and it has a lesbian romance in it, and I still didn't pick it up. So I've corrected it. I got it. I went to Barnes & Noble over the weekend and I saw it, and I knew that I had to grab it because I've been in the mood for something a little bit spooky. So this book follows two main characters. It follows Lena and Mr. Morley. Lena is an extremely logical and scientific kind of person. She believes in what she can see and what she can touch, not necessarily a faith kind of person, and definitely not into the spiritual. But unfortunately, she is forced to turn to the paranormal spiritual side of things when her younger sister, Evie, is murdered and she's unable to figure out who the killer is. Lena turns to a renowned spiritualist named Vaudeline, who is known for being able to conduct seances to contact the spirits of murdered people and ask them who killed them and figure out the circumstances of their death. Vaudeline isn't able to go to Lena's home to conduct the seance, so Lena travels to Paris to study under her in the hopes that she'll be able to learn enough to conduct the seance on her own and contact her sister to find out what happened. On Mr. Morley's side, Mr. Morley is a kind of insecure man who is vice president of the spiritualism division of the London Seance Society. The London Seance Society is this gentleman's club in London that is renowned for conducting successful seances and being able to give tarot readings and things like this. Although anyone can purchase their services, they only allow men to join the society and study and learn and perform these spiritual acts. On the same day of Lena's little sister's death, the president of the London Seance Society is also murdered, and Mr. Morley has been unsuccessful in his attempts to conduct a seance to figure out who the killer of the president is. So he has to reach out to Vaudeline as well to ask for her assistance in conducting the seance and finding the killer. Finding his killer is of the utmost importance because Mr. Morley knows that they had been investigating some rumors into fraudulent spiritualism within the society. They believe that there are some people within the society who have been faking results during seances in order to get more people attracted to the society and to pay more money. We follow both characters as they work to uncover the murders of their respective people, but it is known that the London Seance Society has many secrets and its members will do whatever it takes to keep some of them hidden. This was a 4.5 stars for me. I really liked the vibes of this book. I will say some of it was a little bit predictable, but I still loved it all the same. I will say if you're in it for the seances only, the book is not majority seances. There are some seances, and there is especially one major scene that is a seance towards the end, but most of it is more of a mystery investigation. But instead of only using physical clues, they're also using their psychic senses to uncover details as well. So if you're only in it for like a horror spirit scary aspect, you might be a little bit disappointed. But if you're thinking of it more as like a Sherlock Holmes investigation, but we're also able to sense like the spirits and sense the energy of a room, then you'll really like this book. But overall, I loved the vibes. It was spooky, it had the mystery. It would be perfect for a rainy day. I was all cozy and snuggled up reading this, even though it was literally 102 degrees outside when I was reading this. I was embracing the spooky vibe of it. This made me want more paranormal books, more paranormal mystery books, more paranormal mystery books with lesbians. Like, it was a really good book. I highly recommend it, and it's kind of a short read. I finished this in all one sitting, so if you really wanted to just like devote a day to it, you could. Alright, that's it for my August books. It was just 6 books, but it really revamped my energy for reading. I'm expecting that for September I'm going to be reading a lot more moody books, probably more spooky, fall vibes, and usually fantasy. I don't know why, but I always read more fantasy in like fall and winter than I do in spring and summer. So that's kind of what I'm expecting for the next couple of months. But that's all for this video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like down below, and feel free to comment the books that you read this month, or if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, feel free to give me your thoughts down below. I would be super interested to see what you guys thought, especially if you also read Shark Heart. I would just love to hear your opinions on everything. If you want to see more videos like this one, or if you just want to see more of me, feel free to subscribe to my channel. But that's it for this one, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye!